right, so today we're going to start with at the very beginning. Bio 102 is all about looking at changes in form. It's all about form determining function and how we get those forms, how we go from one type of organism to another type of organism. So we're going to start off talking about population genetics, looking at evolutionary theory, basic evolutionary theory, and then modern evolutionary theory. And then we're going to move into sort of a look at the diversity of life, look at all of life that's out there. Some possible proposals on the beginning of life, moving from there into looking at organisms and organ systems, and then finishing out the semester talking about ecology, which is really just follow the bouncing electron. How can you pass energy through a system? So we begin sort of at the beginning. We're going to start talking about descent with modification. This is a historical perspective on evolutionary biology. I do want to be very explicitly clear. This lecture, what I'm about to tell you, is not the current theory of evolution. This is not the one that we've worked on for the past 200 years. This is where it started at. This is the baseline level, and then for 200 years we've improved on it to get where we are now. There are flaws in it. There are a lot of flaws in the original evolutionary proposals. We've been working on those flaws. So yes, I know that there are flaws in this, but we're going to, after we discuss this, start talking about modern evolutionary biology, using some mathematical equations, and then showing how really what look like flaws in these historical perspectives, those holes have been filled. So we're going to begin with evolutionary thought. So in the ages, Charles Darwin was not the first person to propose evolutionary thought. He was not the first person to try classifying things, or the first person to try to look at relationships between different organisms. In fact, you get to go back to ancient Greece, because really, that's where science began. Not really. Science began when the first person took a rock and banged it against another rock to get fire. Because really, you do that once, and you're like, ooh, a spark. You do it several times, you get fire. Scientific method. We got this. Ancient Greece, though, that's where we sort of ascribe a lot of our ancient history to. If you look at the Persians, though, they were really, really advanced then as a culture in science, but they just don't get enough credit. Really, this is the history of Western thought. Sorry, diverging. This guy here is Aristotle. Aristotle thought that all life was fixed and unchanging. Life does not change at all. He arranged all of life in what's called the Scala Naturae, which I think is hilarious because he created the Scala Naturae, which is Latin, but he was Greek, so it's not really what he named it. We're going to start off at the very bottom and work our way to the top. At the bottom of the scale, the very bottom, rocks, slugs, plants. Actually, slugs are higher than plants because slugs ate plants. So rocks, then plants, then animals, and at the very, very, very top were humans. Everything was arranged in a very linear line. Each form of life was perfect. Now this was something he picked up from his teacher Plato with the Platonic forms, but we'll discuss that later. If you look at contemporary writing of the time, the Old Testament, each organism was designed by God and was perfect. Same with Aristotle's view. It matched the evidence that people saw because organisms were designed to fit their environment. There was an intelligent designer, and that made them perfectly adapted to their environment. Now this view lasted for thousands of years. In fact, Linnaeus is one of the first scientists whose whole experiences was classification. He wanted to go about and name all the organisms. He wanted to go about and classify them, put them together. He created this idea of binomial nomenclature. Binomial. Bi means two, nomial means name. Two names. Every organism would have two names. A general name and a specific name, otherwise known as the genus and the species. And the reason he did that was for the greater glory of God. His big contribution. Oh, by the way, sidebar. I'm not going to sit there in tests and ask you historical questions. Did Linnaeus do this? Did Lamarck do that? I'm not interested in random trivia like that. I'm just giving you the historical perspective in order to sort of give you a background. It's the whole idea of learning for the sake of learning. He created, so Linnaeus created this nested scale. So instead of it being this linear scale that Aristotle had, he started to sort of put things together in groups, just like you would do. If I was to take lab activity, and I forgot the Skittles, sorry. If I was to take Skittles, a bag of Skittles, Reese Pieces, and M&Ms. And by the way, that's the greatest joke to ever play on somebody. Combine a bunch of Skittles, Reese Pieces, and M&Ms and offer them one, and they won't know what they're eating. If you were to take that, the first thing you're going to want to do is separate it out into the brand of candy. This pile is Skittles, this pile is M&Ms, this pile is Reese Pieces. And then from there, you can continue to nest. The Skittles then can be put into different colors. The Reese Pieces into different colors. The M&Ms into different colors. Heck, if you had M&Ms, some were peanut and some are chocolate or some were caramel or whatever they have now, Rice Krispie, I don't know. You can then subdivide them out. They're nesting inside of each other. Candy's the big concept. Then you've got the 3 types of candy, and then you've got the different colors inside. That's a nested scale. That's what Linnaeus really contributed. The other thing Linnaeus did was really, really novel at the time. He didn't exclude humans from his classification. He said, you know what? Humans are really like those monkeys over there. We look a lot alike. So he put us all together. He put humans into a group with lemurs and simians. He said, this is a group. He did, though, still say humans are the most important, because if you didn't say that, people will kill you. He said humans are the most important, but look, we're kind of like these other guys. So we, for the first time, got nested in with the animals. So before it was always minerals, plants, animals, then humans. Now it's minerals, plants, animals, and the animals include humans. All right, so we haven't gotten to Charles Darwin yet. We want to talk about this other guy first, the guy named Lamarck. Lamarck put forth a theory of descent with modification. I know, this sounds a lot like Darwin. Every organism passes down some characteristic to its offspring that make that offspring better. So he said that you could, traits that are acquired during life can be passed down to your offspring. If you work out and get really strong, your offspring will be really strong. And if they are automatically strong, then they're going to work out more, they're going to get stronger, and get even stronger offspring until you have super babies who can lift large things. Tells Lamarck's idea. And he was, to show this, he pointed out the giraffe. Now, okay, if you guys ever go to a zoo or randomly see a giraffe around, I don't know why you'd see a giraffe around without a zoo, but you know, you might. They are the weirdest looking organisms out there. One thing that always drives me nuts about giraffes is they got horns. And you don't think about giraffes with horns, but they do. They got these 2 little stubby horns at the top. You're like, what are those horns good for? Giraffes are most famous for their very long necks, and they use their necks for all sorts of things. Obviously, people know that they use their necks to get food from trees, right? But they also use their necks to fight. Males will fight each other using their necks and just like start slapping necks together. It's called necking. Now, in that capacity, you can see there's a different vocabulary for giraffes than humans. We don't fight with our necks. It'd be hilarious, but we don't. Lamarck proposed that you started off. I love this picture. This one on the far left over here, stubby-necked giraffe. It still has its super long legs, stubby little neck. And what Lamarck said was, as that giraffe stretched its neck out to get the leaves, its neck slowly grew a little bit bigger, and then it passed that on to its offspring. And then that one, it has a slightly longer neck, it stretched even higher. And every time it's stretching, it's acquiring this longer neck. And that could then be passed down to its offspring. Lamarck's giraffes are super fun. I swear, as far as, I don't even know how did they draw this? Did they just like Photoshop and squish? I mean, it's fun. So that was when Darwin was born. So this idea is around for about 30 years, because Darwin did a lot of his stuff in his early 30s. He actually rejected the idea that acquired traits are passed on. It's not the acquired traits. He thought there was something else. But he did agree, and Lamarck really contributed this idea, variation is important. Some things can survive better because they have better traits. So Darwin wasn't sold on acquired traits being passed down, but he was absolutely sold on the idea that you have to have variation in a population. So as that ties to modern molecular genetics, which you guys learned, I hope, last semester, we understand some of those basic mechanisms for passing on traits. What are the basic mechanisms for passing on traits? Courtney. Basic mechanism. How would you pass down a trait? Reproduction. Okay, cool. And when you're reproducing, so I'm going to get really specific here. Remember the birds and the bees talk, guys? When you're reproducing, you're going to have what two types of cells coming together? Those are chromosomes, but you're getting where I'm going. Yes? Yes, eggs and sperm, says the person in class who understands how reproduction works. So, eggs and sperm. Eggs and sperm are what kind of cells? Sex cells, otherwise known as gametes. And gametes are different than somatic cells or body cells because of what? What? Oh, you guys got this. You got body cells, all the rest of your cells in your body, and you got these sex cells. What's the difference between the two? Big difference, huge difference. Big difference between mitosis and meiosis. They get half the amount of chromosomes. And what's that word? The word you're used to describe half the amount of chromosomes. Haploid. So these gametes are haploid. That means they contain half the chromosome complement. They're going to be able to transmit a chromosome from the mom and a chromosome from the dad. They fuse to form a diploid zygote. So now we're getting not only variation, we're also getting a mechanism for heredity. So this is where Darwin didn't know all that. He kind of just knew there was something out there that was allowing traits to be passed from parent to offspring, but he didn't know what. Luckily, we do know what it is now. Now, in the 1700s, when Darwin was operating, there was a big scientific dispute. We knew there were fossils. Fossils were discovered, and they were really cool. Actually, fossils were discovered long before this. Fossils used to be the basis for the ideas behind griffins. They would find beaked dinosaur skulls and thought, this must be a giant bird that obviously devours people. Dragon bones, things like that. People use fossils to show evidence for that. So we've known about fossils for a long time. We knew that there are organisms that no longer exist in the world. In the 1700s, there was a big dispute over whether or not organisms could die out, whether God would allow organisms to die out, or whether or not these organisms still exist somewhere in the world. We found all these bones. We just don't know what they're to or how they work. People thought that all these ancient lineages, all of these bones were from creatures that coexisted with humans at one time or another, and thus the Dinotopia scene. People didn't know, and it conflicted with their already pre-established ideas. So by the time you get to the 1800s, you end up with people thinking organisms do not change, and they were violent about it. You guys know people. When they disagree, you start disagreeing very politely, and then it devolves. 1800s, things weren't any different. Charles Darwin's research provided a focus for argument. So Darwin, the young man, was sent to school by his father. He was sent to school to be a clergyman because all scientists were a member of the clergy at the time. It's just what you did. Every educated person went to school, you became a member of the clergy, and you learned some scientific discipline. He apprenticed to a man named John Henslow. Now, Henslow was a botanist, and botany was super cool back then because what you do is you go find some plants, you'd press them, and then you'd save them forever, draw some pictures. Life is good. Henslow saw a lot of potential in Darwin. Now, Darwin at this point, late 20s, early 30s, I think late 20s. Henslow introduced him to a guy named Robert Fitzroy, and Robert Fitzroy was the captain of a survey ship called the Beagle. Now, Fitzroy was looking for a naturalist. All ships at that point sailed with a naturalist because naturalists could categorize what's out there. Effectively, are there species out there we don't know, and how can we make money off of them? That's, humans, what we do. So this Beagle was going to sail around the world. Its job, when it left England in 1831, was to sail all the way around the South American coastlines, charting it all out. Then it's going to come across the Galapagos, down by Sydney, around the Horn of Africa, back to South America to restock, and then head back to England. It's a long trip. South America at the time was very, very poorly charted. There was not much research into what's happening in South America. There weren't many products coming from South America. So this was one of the early missions to chart it out. Darwin spent a lot of his time on shore. So they'd come in, they'd start the ship itself would chart around the coastline. Darwin and a crew would go on shore, look for fresh water springs. That could, as you imagine, be very important for a ship. They would chart the different types of animals. What could we eat on the ship? Where could we reprovision? He collected thousands of plants and animals. Now, he wasn't able to take them all back with him. It's not like he was carrying a menagerie of animals along with him. He also noticed that there were fossils in South America. And those fossils were very, very different from the living species he found. But they resembled the organisms that are currently extant on the island. So he found sort of different looking fossils. Maybe they were bigger, maybe they were smaller, but they at least resembled some of the creatures he was seeing. This starts putting some ideas into his head. The other thing he saw in South America was an earthquake. Well, he didn't see it. It's not like you see an earthquake. He saw the effects of an earthquake. An earthquake occurred, right? You guys, have you been in an earthquake before? Because there was one around here. Shake, shake, shake. It felt like, for us, it felt like, I assume here anyway, heavy machinery driving past. Was it different than that? Was it super shaky here? Yeah, you guys are like, whatever, I don't care. Okay, here's what happened to Darwin. Shaking Earth, and what he found was the continent was upthrust, that there was a section that was thrust upwards by several meters. So remember, meters, about that big, right? So about a yard high. So several of those. The ground went from here up there. That's a big jump. And he saw that, and he realized there's something going on here. This could not just happen once, but it could happen many, many times. This might be how we get mountains. One way. This is an image of some seals near, where did this happen? I want to say that I have no idea. I'm not going to lie. This is a recent upthrust. So what happened was there was an earthquake recently, and the ocean floor was thrust up by 28 meters. So like 60 feet, which meant all of this rock was underwater at one point, and it got pushed up. So these seals and sea lions at the top are loving it. It gives them a new place to hang out. They're safe from all sorts of their predators. It's great. And that's just from one upthrust. Over countless millennia, there are lots of earthquakes with lots of upthrusting. moving rocks from really low down up really, really high. So when Darwin found fossils of ocean organisms high up in the Andes, he thought he had an idea. Maybe they got there through upthrusting. Maybe they got there by the rocks moving. Up until now, people were dead set that the only way that ocean organisms and their fossils could have gotten to the top of the mountain was through the large, what's it called? The flood. Noah's flood went over the mountains, and thus that's where all of the sea organisms' remains came from. But now Darwin's got a new way of looking at it. Upthrusting. Geology. The difference is it happens over a long amount of time. The Earth is very old. Now, this conflicted with the view at the time that the Earth was young. I mean, the Earth was only thought to be a few thousand years old at this point. But if you look at Darwin's evidence and Darwin's thoughts, the only way this could happen is if you have a whole bunch of upthrusts over a huge, long time frame. By the way, these are crinoids. They're a really cool organism, and I love looking at them because a lot of times they're put facing upwards like this. The thing is, a lot of them actually hang upside down in the oceans. They have a little ball up top that's an air bladder, so they sort of float along the tops like this. But you always see them hanging out, floating upwards, because that's how their modern organisms do. I just think that's cool. Passing it on to you. All right, so the beagle went around the South American coast, up, and it hit an island chain called the Galapagos. And that's where, you've probably heard of it, that's where he did a lot of his, he really solidified a lot of his thoughts. In my opinion, the reason that's where he solidified his thoughts was because he went from the Galapagos on a really long ocean voyage across the Pacific. And he had a lot of time to think after that, a lot of time to write. So the Galapagos are a group of volcanic islands about 900 kilometers west of South America. They needed to stop and reprovision, and they stopped here. And there were all sorts of cool organisms. These organisms looked different than any other organism they'd ever seen, but they still resembled in some form the organisms from the South American coastline. Whether the tortoises were giant, super long-necked, huge. Lizards, aquatic lizards. These aquatic lizards hang out on the rocks, go swimming a lot. They didn't see aquatic lizards anywhere in South America, but they saw lizards that looked like that. And little known fact, the Galapagos Island is one of the few places in the world where there are fish that have lips. I know, it blew my mind when I found that out too. These organisms are unique to the Galapagos. And I think somebody asked last time, why'd they take the turtles? And they did. These turtles are almost extinct now. That's totally messed up. But they are effectively very big piles of meat. Now, when you're on an ocean voyage, you want to take as much food as you can, but food takes up space, and so does fresh water. And you need fresh water. So what they would do is they'd stop off and reprovision. They'd get food. These tortoises were great food sources because, one, they're large, they're heavy, which means they're dense, and they didn't walk around much because all you did was you flipped them on their back and they couldn't go anywhere. So you set them on their back on the ship, they didn't move, and you ate them later. Yes?
I read that some of the trips, they were being brought over for research purposes, but then they ate them anyways, even though they had other food because they tasted
so good. You would not be surprised at how much humans have eaten through ecosystems just because we're like, man, they're delicious. The Steller sea cow. You guys notice? Do you know what a manatee is? Okay, imagine a manatee, but about 30-some feet long. Okay, giant thing. They're just like manatees. They're sort of slow-moving. They're chill. They hang out in shallow water. They just eat seagrass. They move in herds. I mean, they're really, really nice, for lack of a better word. They're nice organisms. And we looked at them and we're like, they look delicious. And this is the cool part about the stellar sea cow too. Humans went out there to hunt them, and we hunted them with spears. Actually, at first they were using harpoons, and then they decided to use spears, and then just knives. So they'd go up and start stabbing at it, and it wouldn't even run. I mean, yeah. So we ate them to death. Found one population of them, and we're like, these are great, let's eat them. 30 years after we found them, they were all dead. All right, so diversification. What Darwin found in the Galapagos was he hypothesized they'd been colonized from organisms from South America that had somehow made it over to the Galapagos. And then they began to diversify, to fill the ecological niches, or the ecological niches, however you want to pronounce it. This is the progression of the aquatic lizards, or the proposed progression. About 2.5 million years ago, the lizards made it from the mainland out to one of the islands in the Galapagos. Tiny island. Somewhere between 1 and 2 million years ago, they'd spread out to more of the islands. So they're migrating, not migrating, they're moving, immigrating. And then less than 1 million years ago, they'd spread out across the entire Galapagos. As they're doing that, one generation after the next, they're adapting to their specific environmental habitat. Now, Darwin's most famous example, of course, is his finches with their beak shapes. He very, very narrowly started focusing on adaptation. So we've got adaptation and variation going on. He saw adaptation to the environment and the origin of new species. So new species coming about were closely related. So we've got now variation, heritability, adaptation, and speciation all getting combined together. These are his big concepts, and he turns around and writes a giant book about it. What he proposed was that new species arise from an ancestral form by the gradual accumulation of adaptations to different environments. He didn't know how it happened. He didn't know about molecular genetics. He didn't know about chromosome theory. But he did know that you're going to get a new species from a species that had previously existed. Now what that means, though, is that now old species can die. Now old species disappear. Now old species go extinct. So his finches were sort of emblematic of this. On each of the islands, you have a different food source. One island, you've got seeds. Another island, you have cactuses. Now that sucks to be the bird on that island. What are you going to eat? Cactus. On another island, they don't have much in the way of animals, so they have to eat buds. And then some of them are going to eat insects. And if you look at their beak shapes, they all started off with an intermediate beak shape, sort of smaller than the large and bigger than the, sort of like that. So you got these different beak shapes all coming from an original ancestral species. And that ancestral species radiated outwards and started to adapt to the environment by providing the most resources for that organism. You have a bigger beak because bigger beaks can crack nuts. You have a sharper beak for these buds ones, so you can slice the buds off the trees. The cactus-eating finch has a very narrow beak because it would really suck to get a cactus poke in the eye. And then the woodpecker finch actually is a tool-using finch, which means it's going to take over the world after we're gone. The tool-using finch will take a stick, put it into a hole, pull out a grub, eat the grub. Each of these beaks is uniquely adapted to its environment. And that led rise to the idea of natural selection. Some organisms are going to be more adapted to their environment. They are going to have a higher survivability rate. So if we were to look at these bugs, beak. All right, we look at these bugs. The gecko is going to eat the bugs that it can see. In this case, it's eating the darker colored bugs, leaving the light green bugs behind. That means that in the next generation, you're primarily probably going to have light green bugs. They have a higher fitness, a higher level of reproductive success. So Darwin came up with all this stuff. He's on his ship. He wrote a book, Life is Good. He gets back home, and he's like, yeah, I'm not going to tell anybody. Now, I can kind of understand that. What he was scared of was the torch-wielding mob. He's got some ideas that are completely going against modern thought, or hit the thought of his time. So he was scared of the backlash. He didn't publish. 15 years later, so he had written all this up, not all of it, but he had all these ideas. He'd written them all down. He's got this brilliant concept, and he's scared to put it out. A guy named Alfred Wallace, right here, he came out and said, you know what, I have an idea. And pretty much he laid out exactly what Darwin thought. 1950, he published it. John Henslow, Darwin's mentor, of course, was like, publish, just publish. And Darwin's like, your name's not going to be on it. So Wallace talked to Henslow, and Henslow's like, look, I know you just published all these ideas you thought were brilliant. Truth is, this other guy came up with it 15 years ago, and he was just scared. And Wallace was really, really nice about it. Because if I came up with an idea and I just like put my neck out there, I am no way giving you credit for that if you came up with it 10 years ago. And you see that all the time, right? You see people like, you know what, I had that idea. Oh, heck, there are probably people in your family who have had like ideas for like, I don't know, the ShamWow or something like that. And they're like, I came up with that. Or all those made on TV products. Do you guys, you see, okay, sidebar, made in TV. You guys know these made in TV products, right? What's your favorite one? Do you have any? I like the bacon bowl. Have you seen this? Okay, I have to describe the bacon bowl. What somebody did, I have to play on your desk now. They took a bowl, regular freaking bowl. They put it put it down and wrapped bacon over it, raw bacon. Put the bowl in the microwave. Hit start. 5 minutes later, they pulled it out. They let it sit so it solidifies, and then they removed the bowl, and now you have a bacon-shaped bowl. You guys don't seem as blown away by that as I am. You could have a salad in a bacon bowl, and then it's like, oh, okay, forget the salad. You have a bacon bowl. How cool is that? You didn't make eggs, put it in the bacon bowl. You don't need anything else. It's awesome. All it was a bowl in the microwave. So I saw this in the stores. A friend of mine's like, I've done that for years. And I was like, yeah, but that's the guy who went out and sold it. Like, yeah. Or they have these little balls that you throw into a dryer so you don't have to use dryer sheets. Have you seen those? They're brilliant. Except the problem is, if you take a ball of tinfoil, throw it in the dryer, it does the exact same thing. The difference is somebody stuck their neck out and they sold it. They made money on it. So the rest of us who was like, we've been doing that for years. Doesn't matter. So Wallace turned around and said, you know what? You did come up with it first. You can have the credit. So Darwin finished his book. Wallace published his paper and said, all of this stuff is great. You should read this guy's book. He like gave him a little, what's it called? Shout out. Yeah, a little shout. He's just like, this is for you. Charles Darwin came up with this. I'm publishing it here, but you should go read his book. And that's where you get the origin of the species. This is what Darwin's original book looks like. Like, you can see the original manuscript of it. The origin of the species by means of natural selection. You'll notice it doesn't say anything about evolution in there. The word evolution didn't come about at all. Ever mentioned in there. What Darwin discussed was descent with modification. One organism gives rise to the next organism, gives rise to the next, and each time there's a little bit of a change. Sort of like Lamarck's idea. One level to the next to the next. And this led to this idea of descent with modification is what gave rise ultimately to biological unity. Organisms all share a lot of characteristics. You guys have seen that, right? There are animals that look a lot like people. And they don't look a lot like people. I mean, really. They, though, have the same basic forms we do. Look at you, a dog, and a squirrel. Heck, you, a dog, and a turtle, and a fish. How are you the same? What? You're all alive. Okay, what does it mean to be alive? Oh, there you go. Characteristics of life right there. What does it mean to be alive? It means you got cells. You're organized through cells. You can reproduce. You may not have done it yet, but you can. You got metabolism. You have to break things down. You have to, as you break it down, you can get energy from it. You maintain a consistent internal environment. You're able to pass down traits through heredity. You respond to stimuli. That is, if somebody pokes you, you do something about it. You grow, you change over time, and you adapt. You adapt to your environment, and your children might have a different level of fitness than you do. And we'll talk about fitness in a few minutes. Pretty much, your children may be able to have more kids than you, then outcompete everybody. Darwin noticed that all of life had these common traits, and they all likely descended from a universal common ancestor. Now, what we call that today is LUCA, the last universal common ancestor. This is the organism from which all organisms are derived. It lived a long time ago. So what he thought was you had this ancestral organism from a long time ago, and as it lives in different environmental conditions, it's going to adapt to those different environments, leading to new forms and new functions. For instance, there was an ancestral form of a bird. Don't know, it probably looked like a dinosaur. But ancestral form of a bird. If you look at modern birds, you've got flamingos, ducks, and, I don't know, avocets. They all have very different structures, different beaks, different forms, different functions. A flamingo, you guys have seen flamingos before, right? Flamingos all do this whole thing, like with their 1 foot. They look prissy. But for the most part, their heads are underwater. They take their head, they stick them underwater, because what they're doing is they're using their sort of curve-shaped beak to look for mollusks. They put it in their mouth, take a big scoopful of sand, and they strain all of that out to find whatever was in it. Have you guys ever used your teeth to sort of strain Jell-O? Okay, thanks. Appreciate it. Nobody else understands that. So what you do is you put a block of Jell-O in your mouth, and you kind of like push it with your tongue out through your teeth, and then you have this like Jell-O-y slur, and then you swallow it, and it's a lot easier. So if it was up to me, I would drink all of my meals because I am completely lazy and I don't like to chew. But the idea is so these flamingos strain the stuff out of their beaks. Their beaks are adapted to that. Ducks, they've got a different type of beak. Their beaks are actually sharp. Don't get bitten by a duck. From experience, they're mean little creatures. Sharp beaks, and they will cut you. Like with their beaks, they're not like going to pull a switchblade on you or anything. They'll stick their head into the grass, and they're looking and rooting around for aquatic plants, seeds, snails, whatever they can get. This little snip there, take a snip. These avocets, on the other hand, they've got beaks that curve upwards. And what they do is they take their beaks, they put them right along the water's edge, the surface of the water, and slide it back and forth like this. And they scoop up bugs in a net that way. So they pretty much just run into bugs. You guys have seen water striders, things that are like skimming right along the water surface. Ooh, all those stupid gnats that are everywhere. Yeah, that's what they eat. Their beak shape is completely adapted to what they're eating. But you can see that they have common traits, common ancestry. This led to, over a long time, a lot of diversity in life. Lots and lots and lots of different things. Lots of new types of organisms. It just takes a long time. So now Darwin has to figure out, how am I going to convey this without making people kill me? And that's important for when you're making an argument. In case you guys haven't figured that out yet, you need to make sure that the person is on the same page with you and that they follow your argument and they accept your argument. So what he started with was not, okay, everything you've ever known is wrong. I'm going to start and tell you how you're wrong about life. Instead, he said, here's the deal. We all know about selective breeding. Selective breeding is the way we've gotten all these other types of foods and vegetables. Humans are great at selective breeding. We know this. Farmers know this. You take a big cow and a big cow and you put them together, and some of the offspring are big and some are little. And then you eat the little ones and breed the big ones. And over time, you get a new type of cow. If you want new types of vegetables, you breed for the trait that you want. Horses. The Persians were breeding horses for thousands of years. There are books that are worth more than lives of in families detailing the history of the horses. They don't care about their own personal history. Okay, they do. But the horses and who bred to who and when and what traits you were looking for. There are tomes of these. That's hereditary information. We knew how to breed for faster horses, stronger horses, stupid horses. Okay, breeding. Speaking of breeding, dogs. We bred the hell out of dogs, didn't we? You can't even tell the difference between, like, you look at something, you're like, that's not a dog, that's a rat. And you know you've all done that. You're like, yeah, no. You see people carry around dogs in their purse. It's like, it's not a dog anymore. But it is. If you think about it, humans, we selectively bred for stupid in dogs. Any of you guys have a dog? Okay, is your dog dumb? Yes, your dog is stupid. You look at it, it looks at you, and you're like, oh, aren't you a little idiot? And it's like, oh, yes, I am. Just keep petting me right there. Dogs used to be wolves. Wolves, in case you didn't know, hunted humans. Like, literally, here are humans, here are wolves. Wolves comes in, eats us. That's the way it worked. Until back during the most recent ice age, well, the most recent established ice age, what's a thought happened was humans pretty much found some wolves, killed them because kill or be killed, and there were little puppies left. Now, who can kill a puppy? Right, it's hard to kill a puppy. So they took the puppies and they brought them in. And then they fed the puppies from their food, and these puppies started to grow bigger. Now, you got some puppies, some wolf puppies. They're getting bigger. You're hungry. One of the wolf puppies bites you. What do? That's right. You eat the wolf puppy because it bit you. And but you kept the stupid one. You kept the one who's like, I'm not going to bite you. Just give me some food. You feed it. It gets dumber and dumber and dumber. And then we start training them to, like, look out, you know. We started getting this really cool relationship with these proto-dogs. These used to be wolves. And we're very slowly over time breeding out aggression. We don't want them to attack us. We want them to bark when other things are coming around. We want primitive alarm systems. So we do that for a while. And then, because we're human, we start to get established. We get an agriculture-based society, and we kept the dogs. We don't really need dogs in an agricultural-based society, but we kept them. We start growing sheep, and we're like, oh, let's make the dog chase the sheep so we don't have to. And the dog's like, I want to chase the sheep. Chase the sheep in circles, put it in a pen. Good dog, have a food. Bite me, you're dead. So we start breeding all these traits in the dogs. Selective breeding. And then we start getting ideas. We got dogs and we got a lot of time. Let's just start making them do whatever we want. So we have these dogs that retrieve things. You know, I shoot a duck. I don't want to go get it. That dog will get it. And the dog, this is how dumb they are, runs out, grabs the duck, and doesn't eat it. It's like, I've got the duck. Look, I'm happy. Now give me some food. It's like you literally had food in your mouth at the time. and you brought it to me. We start to go nuts. We're like, you know what? I want to have the smallest dog I possibly can. Let's just keep breeding downwards. And then they went the other way. I want a dog the size of a horse. You guys have seen like mastiffs, right? Those things are giant. Why do you need a dog this big? Doesn't make sense. And seriously, the Chihuahua. You've seen a Chihuahua? They have no. What possible selective advantage is there to being a Chihuahua? None. What does it do for humans? Nothing. Because at that point, we're just like, let's see what we can do. Then we thought, guard dogs. Now we got to breed aggression back in. So we don't want to keep the ones that are happy and nice. No. They're not food anymore. Now that's somebody else's problem. But still, we did all this stuff. We know selective breeding. We know selective breeding really, really well. People in Darwin's time knew selective breeding. Check out selective breeding. All of, so you guys have had cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale, bok choy. All of these are from a wild mustard that our ancestors decided, let's see what happens. They all are descended from this one plant, every single one of them. And you know you've looked at, Brussels sprouts too. You've looked at Brussels sprouts and thought, they look like little cabbages. Because they are. I know. Broccoli. Broccoli, each of those little tiny green things on the end, you know, because you really only eat the top, nobody eats the stalks. You take a bite. What you're eating are the florets, the flowers, versus the actual fruit. I mean, they're not the same plant, but they're derived from the same plant. And it blew my mind when I learned all of them came from the mustard plant. Same family. We are really good at breeding. Corn. What color's corn? Yellow, right? Everyone's like, there's the wrong answer to this. Of course, we're like, corn is yellow. Corn didn't used to be yellow, not by any far stretch. You know that corn that you see around Halloween? It's all sorts of different colors. That's the original color of corn. And that's even that stage of corn. Corn started off as grass, teosinte, about this big. And then this was the head of it. It was about that big. So what people would do, it looked almost like cattails. You know what those are? Grow along the edges. People would go, they'd harvest the tops, and then grind them into a paste, and you'd eat it. That was early human agriculture. Over time, what we started doing was saying, okay, we went to the bog where these grew, we cut them, but we kept the ones that were the biggest and fattest or the tallest. And we saved those to plant for next year, and we ate all the rest. All right, so then we grew them, and it turned out next year they were a little bit taller, a little bit thicker. Over time, you ended up with this very, very primitive corn. It grew about this high. And then literally the ears of corn were that big. But they were thick and plump and sugary, filled with starch. They were more nutritious. All right, so then we keep going. And now we've got our super big corn, grows twice a year, lots of ears of corn popping off of it. Thing is, humans, being as cool as we are, we're like, you know what? Not only do I want corn like that, I want them to be monoculture. Monoculture means, mono means one, right? We want them all to look the same. Because when you go to the store, if you see corn that looks different from other corn, do you buy it? No, because there's something wrong with it. It's just genetically a little bit different. But we ended up making corn that was all exact clones of each other. The same corn over and over and over again. So you have an ancestral form that through artificial selection of humans became a modern form. The strawberry, the modern strawberry, sorry, I can do lots of examples of this. The modern strawberry is octoploid. That means it has 8 sets of chromosomes. The ancestral form is diploid, 2 sets of chromosomes. The ancestral form of the strawberry is, if you guys ever, how many of you guys cut your own grass? Good, okay. Have you ever gotten lazy and let it grow a little tall? And you notice that there's these little berries that grow, those red berries? That's the ancestral form of the strawberry. Doesn't taste like a strawberry. Don't eat it. It's gross. But over time, by doubling and quadrupling the number of chromosomes in there, human selection, artificial selection, we got our commercial octoploid strawberry. So, one more example of artificial selection. The chicken. You have probably heard stories, I know I've heard stories about like KFC having to be called KFC because they don't serve chicken anymore. Have you heard that, like these rumors and things? It was an old rumor. Okay, maybe not. Sorry, didn't mean to put that into your heads then.
Isn't it true?
It's not.
I don't believe that. Don't eat KFC.
Oh no, I'm not saying eat KFC. Trust me. It's greasy and it will give you a stomach ache. But it's actual chicken. The thing is, for years and years and years, we've been selectively breeding chickens. So in 1957, that was our chicken. By 1978, they'd gotten a lot bigger and fatter. By 2005, look at the difference. We're eating much, much larger organisms because we've selected for those. You might even be able to say these are two totally different species based on our artificial selection. So what Darwin said was, okay, you're all with me. We can do this artificially. You've seen it happen. You've done it. You're farmers. You've done this in the field. All I'm saying is maybe it happens in nature too. And that's where we get the idea of natural selection. So he then put forth a bunch of observations. First observation, members of a population often vary in their inherited traits. Observation 1. These are a bunch of one of these things called ladybugs. Ladybugs have lots and lots of different shapes, colors, forms. The other observation he had is that we produce way too many offspring. There are more offspring than the environment can support. Except with humans, apparently. We make away. Or we try to. This is a collection of Daphnia magna, water fleas. If I was to throw a bunch of them into a tank, they would very, very quickly eat all the other organisms in the tank and then die out. There's only enough energy to support so many organisms. So between the two observations, there are differences among organisms, and there's not enough energy in the environment to support them all. He inferred that those that inherited a trait that gave them an advantage would thrive. Those that inherited a trait that did not give them any advantage would die. Those that thrived would have more offspring that looked like them and had that trait. So over time, that trait would be passed on throughout the population. Have you guys ever seen a movie called Idiocracy? If not, it's a really scary movie to watch. The reason it's a scary movie to watch is because they go through this sort of this idea. What they said in Idiocracy was you have two groups of people. They're going to be the very, very smart people. We have two of them. And we have people who are not so smart. Over here. And there are two of them. The movie is based on the premise that people who are highly educated and very intelligent don't have as many children. So they went ahead, and the smart people had two kids. So two people produced two children. The not so smart people had a lot more. So they went on and had like 8 kids. It's also predicated on the idea that this is hereditary. The smart people had smart kids, and the smart kids went on to do things. Didn't have time for kids. So these two kids may have had 2 kids each, which led to 4. But these went on to have more kids, and thus went up to 64 offspring. And over time, the world was populated by the not-so-smart people. So the movie goes into the implications of that. And we all thought back in the 90s when it was made, it was like, this is really funny. And then we looked at it and we're like, oh, now it's a documentary. And you can look around and you've seen the people you graduated high school with. You know the ones I'm talking about, don't you? You're thinking and you're like, yeah, they shouldn't be reproducing right now, and they are. Right? I mean, I could be wrong, but trust me, I looked at it and I was like, I've got 2 kids, and I know people who really shouldn't have them, and they're still going strong. Bio 101. Because you guys are the ones who made it, right? So those Bio 101 students, whatever, they're not going to make it. All right, so next inference he made. This unequal ability of individuals to survive and reproduce will lead to the accumulation of favorable traits in the population over generation upon generation upon generation. Over time, you build up traits that will help you reproduce. Now, the name of the game is reproduction. People ask, how do you win at life? You know, what's the point of life? I will tell you unequivocally, the point of life is to reproduce from a biological standpoint. Passing on your genes, that's what matters for biology. Pardon? Unless you shouldn't. You self-select, you're like, you know what? I got issues and I don't want to pass those down. And that's a rare person to do that. And the sad part is the person who thinks that is probably actually the one where you're just like, you know, maybe self-reflection would be a good thing. So Darwin concluded that if artificial selection can bring about dramatic changes in a short period of time, then natural selection can do it over a long period of time, over lots and lots of generations. So what this meant was, 1, individuals do not evolve. It's not like in Lamarck's time where you can change your attributes currently. You have your attributes, and they may be variable in some small way while you're alive, but evolution occurs in a population over generations. You, as an individual, will not evolve. Us, as a population of humans, will. Natural selection can amplify or diminish only heritable traits. If a trait is not heritable, it cannot be affected by natural selection. Heritability is key. And natural selection is always happening. But the trait that is favored fully depends on the environment the organism is in. You always have natural selection happening, but if the environment changes, suddenly you may be acting on a different trait. Questions? Whew, it's a lot, right? Hour of Darwin. So now we have the theory of natural selection. And I say theory because remember, we are scientists, and there's a difference between a theory and a hypothesis and a law. We don't use laws right now because laws say it's universal all the time, forever and ever and ever. And honestly, modern us, scientists now have a hard time creating laws because we don't want to make an absolute universal, because honestly, we have no idea what happens like in the heart of a black hole. So we can't really make a law. So the highest level of scientific thought right now is the theory. A theory is something that is widely accepted, has a whole bunch of experimental evidence to support it. It is our absolute best explanation using all of the current information we have. A theory is not a hypothesis or an educated guess. Now that comes into, you end up having a lot of confusion with lay people who don't know science, because when you say theory, you mean, you scientists, we're all scientists now, because you made it through 101. When you say theory, you mean it is as close to, it is our absolute best explanation using all of the given facts that we have. Whereas when a lay person uses it, they mean, I think this is what happens. And that leads to confusion. So when people are like, it's just, evolution is just a theory. Yeah, it's a theory. That means it's the best way you've got right now. If we can find something else, we will accept that and test it. But the deal is, right now, this is the best we got. There's a lot of evidence for natural selection, a whole lot of it. Direct observations, different levels of homology, the fossil record, and biogeography. All of these are going to provide evidence for natural selection. So first off, direct observations. MRSA. What was it? Methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. So MRSA is a very deadly bacteria. MRSA first was discovered in the 1950s. People were getting lesions, so they'd get infected by a bacteria. These lesions would grow, and it would eat their flesh. They grew bigger and bigger, and we couldn't treat it until we got penicillin. And then we're like, yeah, now we've destroyed the bacteria. Bacteria have nothing on us, we win. We started wiping out bacteria left and right until about 2 or 3 years after penicillin was introduced. Suddenly, a penicillin-resistant strain of Staphylococcus, staph infection, was found. Okay, now people are dying again. We can't kill the bacteria. It's okay, because in the 1970s they made methicillin. Methicillin was the silver bullet. It killed every bacteria out there. Nothing could survive it. And then, sometime in the 1980s, we discovered methicillin-resistant lines. We're like, oh, this is bad. Fun story, though. In the 1980s, I have read so many historical papers, and I'd say historical about the 1980s. This was like so long ago. But I've read papers from scientists publishing saying we have defeated bacteria. We are on the verge of eliminating disease. Not kidding. This is what they were saying because of methicillin and then the adoption of vancomycin. We've got 2 ways of killing bacteria, and they can't survive either. We win. Go humans. They stopped doing research into new antibiotics. And then in 1997, there was a strain of MRSA that evolved that was resistant to both methicillin and vancomycin. Oh God, we have not researched antibiotics in years. Suddenly, we have a bacteria that is resistant to everything we have. We need something new. So now we've got this methicillin and vancomycin and penicillin-resistant bacteria that is just devouring people if you catch it. Thing is, we don't have a good solution for it yet either. I've had students get MRSA, and they're out for the semester. They can't do anything, and they can't heal. They're literally trying to rely on the body's natural immune functions to stop it because we have no medicine for it. This is an example of evolution in action. This is not an artificial selection thing. We didn't create MRSA to say, we're going to wipe out people. We created it by accident. It evolved on its own after generation because these bacteria breed every day. We breed every 20 years. Them, every day or every few hours. You can also see evidence for natural selection in homology. Related species have structures that have an underlying similarity. They may have a different function, but the structures look the same. Here we have a human hand, a dog's foot, a horse's foot, a bat's wing, a bird's wing, and a seal's flipper. And you can see the metacarpals and the phalanges are all there in all of them. There's the same basic structures. They may do different functions. Obviously, a seal swims, a human grabs, a dog runs. But the same basic structures are there. There's an underlying similarity. So that's called homology. Homo meaning same. We all have the same structures. The more closely related we are to an organism, the more similar our structures will be. So here we have, so when you're talking about your cat or your dog, are their front legs their arms, or are they just legs? Their arms. Right. I mean, everybody does that. There's like, and you pick up your dog and you're like, look at his arms. Your dog is stupid, so they let you do that. But it's like you got these human arms, cat, and look, the whale and the bat, they all have those homologous structures. They all have those similar features. Those features were present in a common ancestor. Maybe not the last universal common ancestor, but a common ancestor. Now this is contrasted with what's called convergent evolution. Different lineages looking similar because they had to adapt to the same environment. Sharks, dolphins, ichthyosaurs, and penguins all have what's called a thuniform shape. They all are streamlined. Why are they streamlined like that? Why do they have that form? Right, they have to, it's not just the opposite of aerodynamic, it is aerodynamic. Yeah, well, pretty much water is just super heavy air. Water and air are both liquids. They're both fluids. They're not liquids. Both are fluids, so they all have both have the same dynamics. By having this shape, you can swim faster and you're more maneuverable. So that's called convergent evolution. That is sort of symbolized by analogous structures. And I'm pretty sure you can expect a question that says, like, what's the difference between homologous structures and analogous structures on your exam? And if you didn't write that down, you're absolutely nuts. So, analogous structures are those that share similar function but not a common ancestry. A moth's wing, a bat's wing, a pterodactyl's wing, and a bird's wing are all structurally different, but they all have the same function. They evolved from different forms, but they all came together to look in the same shape because form determines function. In this case, having those big flat surfaces helps them fly. So you got homologous structures, where you've got the same structural underlying components, and analogous structures where you have different underlying components. But both of them are going to have could have roughly the same functions. The fossil record also provides a lot of evidence. It shows organisms from ancient times are related to modern organisms, but they've changed over time. And biogeography also provides some evidence, because what you end up seeing is, let's see, the geographic distribution of organisms are impacted by continental drift, the movement of the continents along sort of currents in the Earth's crust. So you've got the continents constantly moving, not just the ones that are above water, but the ones that are underwater, and moving together in different ways. And because of that, we can find evidence of, say, mosasaurs at both the tip of South America and at the tip of Africa. The same types of organisms are found at edges of geographic ranges. It helps us predict where we'll find things. Endemic species are species that are found only in one place in the entire world. I mean, endemic means that's the only place you'll find them. There are certain endemic species, so like the James River. The James River mussel, you're not going to find it anywhere else in the world. It's in one spot. It's dying out, but it's in one spot. Australia has a bunch of endemic species. The kangaroo, the koala, the platypus. You're not going to find them anywhere else. Because of that, that sort of demonstrates the idea that islands are certain specific ecological niches that are broken off from the rest of the world, so that nothing else, so the organisms adapt to that environment and only that environment. By the way, first of my pitches, don't go to Australia. Australia will kill you. It really will. I mean, there's some nasty things. The kangaroos are cute, right? Everyone's like, oh, kangaroos, look, they're so cute. Let me tell you a kangaroo story. So we got this kangaroo, right? There was a kangaroo and it was being hunted by dingoes. Now, dingoes are wild dogs, and these aren't stupid dogs. These are dogs that will kill you. Also living in Australia, don't go to Australia. So the dingoes were hunting the kangaroo. The kangaroo had to escape, right? So the dingoes We're following the kangaroo, and the kangaroo escaped by swimming out into the river. And people are like, oh no, poor kangaroo, it's going to get eaten by the dingoes. The dingoes, again, dogs, are chasing the kangaroo into the water. The kangaroo gets halfway across and turns around. The dingoes swim out to it. The kangaroo takes those little paws it's got, holds the dingo underwater until it dies. Literally, it kills puppies. Koala. People look at the koala and they're like, oh, it's a koala, I just want to pet it. You know what? There's a major problem with koala these days. Do you guys know what it is? That's right, syphilis. Syphilitic, angry koala. And koala will bite. Not only will they bite, they will remove a limb, not limbs, fingers, digits. They are horrible. Think about like, I don't know, sort of like, they're like cute little possums. You wouldn't go, no, they are like the cute version of possums. You're not going to go and like pet a possum and be nice to a possum because possums are rats in trees. I mean, that's really what they are. Koala are fat possums. And the platypus. Oh, everyone's like, oh, but the platypus is so cute. I saw Phineas and Ferb. It was awesome. Yeah, the platypus is absolutely poisonous. Not only is it poison, like it looks nice. Behind its back leg is a spur, and that spur has a neurotoxin on it, and it will cut you, and you will burn. Australia will kill you. There's nothing in Australia that wants you there. Nothing that wants you to live. There are these little jellyfish the size of your thumbnail. You're swimming. It stings you. You're dead before you know you've been stung. It's called the box jelly. Size of your thumbnail. Swimming along and dead. Yeah. No, well, I will say there are great whites out by Australia. The megalodon is gone. It's unfortunate. Well, it's not unfortunate because those are really freaking big things. But the megalodon is gone. It can't survive in today's conditions, no matter what. There are some mockumentaries that are like In Search of the Megalodon, looking in the Caribbean and out by Australia. It's not real. But there are creatures that are, you would not expect them to be as big as they are out there. And you're like, oh, that will kill me. Yeah, it will. Anyway, there's not much in Australia that wants you alive. There you go. The few things they're right, because they're eating them. I would too. Farmers can shoot kangaroo, except I don't like shooting. Not only are they, so the idea then is shooting kangaroos is legal now because the drought is so bad. And the kangaroos are starving as well. You want to make sure that, back to the idea there are only so many resources in the environment. Right. Yes?
Kangaroo meat is widely sold, and it is actually some of the best meat I've ever had.
There you go. So it works out. Eat the kangaroos. So there you go. Most of these island species, most of these endemic species are actually very closely related to the island next door. So from the nearest island, you can see species that are very, very similar. And I point out that's a monitor lizard. It's not a alligator. Think Komodo dragon type. Giant lizard. Also, guess where it lives? That's right. Ballooning spiders. Where does it live? Australia. That's right, because you guys are scared of spiders in general. Imagine them coming down from the sky at you. Yeah, so these spiders will shoot out a web. This is me shooting out a web. Catching the wind, going up into the air. And that's a log. That's not an organism. But what I point this out is to say, organisms can get across channels. Organisms can get across water. We'll talk about Krakatoa in, I think, the next lecture. But what ends up happening is the new areas can be colonized by migrants pretty easily. Lizards swim. Even if they couldn't swim, there's lots of logs drifting along the ocean that organisms can ride on. At the very least, birds and insects. And Spiders apparently can fly. Spiders ballooning? Yeah. They do live in America as well. They also live in Australia. Otherwise, you're like, oh God, they've come from Australia. They're gonna get us.
So was that spider dying? Did I watch it? Like
No, it's actually on its way to go reproduce. Yeah, that's fun. That is, in fact, a tardigrade. Yes, a water bear. I just like the picture. I really love tardigrades. In 101 last semester, I was very excited because we found a tardigrade in our soil sample. We're like, oh, let's play with it. So what Darwin said was, you know what? These organisms could have swam from one place to another, colonized, and reproduced. That gave rise to these endemic species. So there we go. That is the historical perspective on evolution. I was like, whew, done with that. Historical perspective on evolution. Obviously, in the past 200 years, we have come much, much farther than that. In the next lecture, we're going to get in, and by the next lecture, I mean the one that's coming up right now. We're going to get into mathematically how we can show this is occurring, figure this all out through deductive reasoning and observation, not simply inference. You guys know I don't like inference. I don't like discovery-based science. I am really big on experimental science. So that's where we're going now. And I want to remind you, at the end of each lecture, I've got content review questions. These will help focus your studies. These will help tell you what I think is important from today's lecture. They are not, and I want to repeat this many, many times, these are not the exam questions. These are simply a way to focus your studies in what I think is important. And I happen to make you 2 pages worth for this lecture. All right? Do you have any questions?